Our next question comes from Virginia Hookham.
Federal Labor seems to be rising in opinion polls lately, due partly to personal attacks on Tony Abbott and announcements of massive new programs. Why is it then that the media, particularly the ABC, has not challenged Labor on unfunded promises that are so obviously directed at doing one thing only, boosting the image of the Prime Minister?
Mark Carnegie.
Well, to me, there's a whole series of things that are wrong with that statement as a business person at the moment. I think the first thing is, this year we've had a very, very difficult backdrop to the economy, but the government has sat there and tried to be as fiscally disciplined as it possibly can. The thing that's happened is that a whole series of special pleading and regulatory capture by a whole series of interest groups, mostly on the right of politics, plus what the McKinsey report talks about, which is a huge amount of declines in productivity as a consequence of the right of politics and management, means that the government is under a huge pressure at the moment. And if you look at the two things that are the most important in the new initiatives that the government worries about funding, the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Gonski Commission, for $12 billion, I think both of those things should be seen as investments rather than expenses. And I worry far more about the fact that if we don't invest in these areas now, the unfunded promises of either side of the parliament are going to be 10 times as bad when the demographic tsunami hits us.
Tanya Plibersek.
Well, on the question of polling, I'd say one swallow does not a summer make, and certainly we're not fixated on the polling at all. The allegation about unfunded promises is just Liberal rhetoric. Twice a year, every government accounts for all its spending and all its saving. It's called the budget. Everybody knows that happens in May, and the mid-year economic forecast, which will happen in the next few weeks, where every spending measure and every saving measure will be laid out there for everybody to see. What we don't know is how Tony Abbott's going to fill his $70 billion black hole, the black hole that Joe Hockey admits is there, that Andrew Robb admits is there, we've got no indication. Joe Hockey says that there is a list of savings that he's worked up and he's got them there ready, but he's not prepared to show them according to the Charter of Budget Honesty. He's not prepared to show them to Treasury, to get them costed, to make them public in any way.
Okay, one
more thing, Tony.
You're talking about but as our questioner pointed out, you're talking about the opposition. She, and I believe a lot of people do want to know where the $12 billion plus the other policies
like I say,
is actually going to come from.
The mid-year economic forecast will be out in a matter of weeks, and everybody will be able to read it there. And I challenge Joe Hockey to put his costings on the table at the same time. And I just have to say this.
Will that tell us where the $6 billion for the Gonski money?
Of course it will.
So
how much of the money spending and all the saving will come from?
How much of the $6 billion extra funding to end school inequality will be there in that report?
Well, you have to look at the mid-year economic forecast.
I really don't want this to turn into party politics. The $6 billion for Gonski is not an expense. It's a critical investment in our country's future. Just because we have a set of national accounts that puts that in the expense line. It's an outrage that people are sitting there and fighting about whether or not, in a country that is going to have less and less people working, we don't invest in our children. It absolutely staggers me.
Let's go to Kelly O'Dwyer and see if you agree.
Well, surprisingly, Tony, I don't. I agree on a couple of broader points, though, and that is we have to look to the future. We actually do have to look to the future because we have to think about who ultimately is going to have to pay for all of this. Because at the end of the day, the person who pays is the Australian taxpayer, and that bill gets paid at some point. So if we want our children born into debt, where their future is effectively mortgaged from the day that they are born, then let's do exactly. Well, just let me finish. Then let's do exactly. Then let's do exactly what you say.
You cannot be sitting there and saying this. It's Q&A. This is not some low-rent tabloid thing. No, it is. I'm sorry. You have the lowest government debt In the OECD, we have $700 billion of national debt and we have the highest household debt in the developed world. And yet the Liberal Party spends all its time talking about a trivial amount of government debt because it polls really well. And we're sitting there and saying, you know, $6 billion a year to change the education system to make Australia globally competitive. Somehow that's a terrible thing to do?
So Mark, it's not trivial, OK? The money that is being spent is not trivial. The Financial Review actually looked at all of the new spending announcements that have been announced by this government, and they've said it's $120 billion. Give me a chance. I gave you a chance, Tanya.
It's just wrong.
Well, it's not wrong. It's absolutely not wrong.
It's wrong.
I mean, you know, we can have a he said, she said sort of, you know, is it wrong, is it not wrong? Well, the fact is the numbers are there and it's very clear that the government is not fiscally responsible. We had today the Treasurer make an announcement, and he made an announcement about the final budget outcome. Now, you know, the deficit that was meant to be around about $22 billion was actually $43.7 billion. That's rather a blowout. The net debt, which was meant to be, you know, around about $106 billion, blew out by $40 billion to be $143.7 billion. So this is not a government that's got everything under control. Plus, every single spending
can I just interrupt your flow
Well,
just for a second, just to answer this fundamental point that's been made at this end of the table, and that is $6 billion to end, or to at least tackle, inequality in our public schools and our schools generally. Good idea, bad idea?
Yeah, well, we think investment in education is actually a very good idea, but the question we ask is how do you pay for it? And Tony, you can't simply throw out there like confetti all of these promises and not actually account for how you're going to pay for it. Do you know why?
That throws to a question we can actually talk about the question of how we
if you do that.
pay for it through the media.